Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the International Peace Coalition. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be moderating today with my two other co-moderators, Dennis Small and Dennis Speed. This is our 31st week of consecutive
51st.
meetings.
51st.
Oh, see, I'm sorry, my 51st. Excuse me, I was distracted by a notification that popped up. Our 51st meeting of consecutive International Peace Coalition meetings. And the idea behind pulling this together is to break people out of their ideologies, pull people who actually want to create true peace in the world and come together to do that from all over the planet, different languages, different ideological outlooks, but all around the same mission to create true peace, which we can only accomplish that if we combine our forces. So we are very appreciative of everyone joining us today. We have a breathtaking historical moment with the near assassination of Prime Minister Fico out of Slovakia, the death of President Raisi in Iran, and the situation which is breaking around world war, the tensions that are happening right now make this meeting all the more important. So I want to thank you, everyone who's joining us today, for attending, for helping us get it out. Please share the invitation, the link to your other organizations. People still have time to get on. And I want to welcome you, if you're new, to please introduce yourself during the meeting, during the general discussion period, where you're from, who you are, and what organization you're with. I'll also include in the chat the agenda for today, so you can see the lineup of speakers. I want to say right off the bat that we did have Francis Boyle, who is going to attend today and speak, but he was called in on an emergency basis for the breaking developments around the ICJ, which we can talk more about that. I'm seeing different messages coming in about what's happening on that right now. So we thank Francis Boyle for all of his work on this, and I look forward to his report when he comes back. I'll also include, I want to make sure, because I see a number of new people on, I'm going to put the sign-up page for the International Peace Coalition in the chat as well. So please leave your email address at least, so you can get on our invitations every week and get the latest updates and activities that we're doing. So with that, I'm going to open it up for the initiator of the International Peace Coalition and the founder of the Schiller Institute, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, to start us off. Please go ahead, Helga.
Yes, thank you. Let me say hello to all of you first. And indeed, you know, one has, since we started this weekly call, one has the feeling that history becomes more dense. What I mean by that is that the beat of breaking developments becomes more short, you know, so that it really seems that the history is somehow going through a phase change. And I think that that is also what is happening. The latest example of that is we just got the news, what you referred to, Anastasia, that the International Court of Justice just ordered today through his president, Nawaf Salam, the Israel to halt the assault on Gaza's Rafah, saying conditions met for a new emergency order. Now, this was the reaction by the court to a request of South Africa because of the ongoing attack on Rafah and the absolutely incredible worsening conditions by the moment. Now, that is causing a very interesting problem because, you know, the question is, will that be enforced? And if so, how? Because so far, all decisions by either the ICJ or the ICC had been blocked by in the UN Security Council because of the veto from mostly the United States. So the question now is what will happen with this absolute emergency where, you know, people are being slaughtered in front of the world eye. Now, this is very interesting because just a few days ago or a week ago, the ICC had ordered an arrest warrant for 3 or 4 Hamas leaders, but also Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant, which obviously was flatly rejected by Israel and the United States. But interestingly enough, even Germany, which had been siding with Israel and the United States up to that point completely, said through their speaker that they would accept the ruling of the ICC. Now, that is a very interesting development because Germany was in a real paradox between its own, basically commitment to stand by the side of Israel no matter what, because of the Holocaust, which had long lost its meaning, given the fact that there was a new genocide underway. But obviously, the pressure of the international community, where in the UN General Assembly, the vast majority of nations had voted for a Palestinian state, and the fact that, the sympathy which may have been with Israel after the after the October 7th attack, because of the ongoing week after week, month after month brutality, that sympathy with Israel had completely disappeared. And, so therefore the world public opinion has completely shifted. And it seems to be dawning on some people in the Western establishment that if you apply a double standard, by condemning African leaders and Putin, but not, Israel and possibly other cases, that what was at risk was not just that particular case, but the legality of the system may still be there, but it was about and is about to lose its legitimacy. And that's a very important difference, because once a system loses its legitimacy, then everything falls apart. Now, that is a very, very interesting situation, because also from the European side, recently Ireland, Spain, and Norway voted for statehood of Palestine, and they were not the first ones. Before there were already Iceland, Sweden, Serbia, Albania, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Belarus, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, and Russia in previous years. So that is now creating a very interesting situation. If the UN Security Council cannot enforce this ICJ order, it may go to the UN General Assembly. And because of what everything has happened in the recent period, there were already discussions that if Israel continues to disrespect all orders, it may be suspended in terms of its participation in the UN General Assembly. So that is just a discussion so far, but that is how dramatic the situation is. Now, the other major development, which I think we have to address, is the fortunately failed assassination attempt against the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Fico, who basically there is now an investigation in Slovakia if this was not a lone assassin, but that he had collaborators, this gunman Sintula, because some of his social media communication was eliminated 2 hours after he had been arrested and his wife had no access to the computer. Now, this is not just Slovakia. What is the issue there is an incredible polarization because of large money influx into Slovakia, into NGOs who are, pushing Western liberal values against the very traditional Slav tradition, which the present Prime Minister and President are proponents of. Now, a similar situation exists in Serbia, in Hungary, and emphatically in Georgia, where the Georgian government had tried to make a transparency law which would force the NGOs to reveal their fundings if more than 20% of the money came from or comes from abroad. Now, that is now a huge issue because the Georgian Prime Minister Kobat Kitze yesterday wrote on a X, on a formerly Twitter, that he has received a threat from a EU commissioner telling him that he should be careful, that Brussels would have to impose a whole bunch of measures if he would not repeal this legislation. And he should see what happened to Fizzo and be very careful. And it sounded really like a complete threat. He did not reveal the name of this commissioner. In the meantime, that commissioner revealed his identity, probably thinking it would come out anyway. And he tried to somehow say this was not a threat, this was meant friendly, blah, blah. But it is unbelievable. And subsequently, Prime Minister Koba-Kitze put out other statements saying that this whole incident reveals how incredibly dangerous the global war party is, that it's an extremely dangerous force, and that they are trying to create a Maidan-style chaos in Georgia. Now, this is incredible. Here you have an ongoing destabilization of several East European countries who are all critical of the war against in Ukraine, against sending weapons to Ukraine. Prime Minister Orban of Hungary just said that Hungary will not participate in any NATO deployment inside Ukraine. Naturally, Fico was famous of having come out very strongly against it. Vučić from Serbia, likewise. So, it is an unbelievable situation that these leaders, after the assassination attempt of Fico, actually speak out and reveal who is behind this destabilization operation. This is unheard of. And it may really cause the EU to fracture completely because it's a scandal of the utmost importance. Now, obviously, the situation in Ukraine becomes more escalated by the day as well. A few days ago, Putin came out, basically made good for his announcement that he, for the first time ever, had a military maneuver of the Russian tactical nuclear weapons in the southern military district, not as a routine exercise, but as an explicit reaction to what he called the provocations from the West, such as Macron threatening to send NATO troops to Ukraine, Cameron telling the Ukrainians that they can use British weapons deep into the territory of Russia. And more recently, a group of congressmen has also written a letter to Defense Secretary Austin requesting authorization that Ukrainians can strike deep into the territory of Russia, which was backed also by Secretary of State Blinken, which naturally was denounced by Russia in the strongest possible terms. Russian Ambassador Antonov called it provocative and extremely dangerous and reckless. So the situation on the ground for Ukraine is getting worse by the day. They're clearly losing a war of attrition where they have neither the manpower nor the material. So this situation is clearly coming to the point which, Kuyat had said already almost a year ago. The decision is between negotiations and escalation. And so far, we have only seen escalation from the side of NATO. Now, I should add the third theater of such geopolitical confrontation which is the Indo-Pacific, where after the election victory of the new president in Taiwan, Lai Ching-te, basically where he made some speech which sounded pretty much like the right for independence. And that was then the trigger for the Chinese Navy and Air Force to have exercises surrounding the island, in a clear signal and demonstration that they will not tolerate Taiwan independence. And there I should just note, since 72, I think, maybe I'm mistaken on I think 72, it was an international agreement certified by a UN resolution, the One China policy, that you do not have two independent equal states, but that Taiwan is a province of China. And that was the basis of international policy for all of these years. Now, in the recent change of the narrative, everybody pretends as if Taiwan has the right for independence, but that is definitely not the case. So if you look at all of this situation, which I can only roughly touch upon, I think it's clear that the next half year, in all likelihood, will be the decisive period for history to decide, are we going into a third world war, or are we going into a new paradigm, overcoming geopolitics, where all nations live together. Now, the markers in this period are naturally on the 6th, between the 6th and 9th of June, you have the European election. This will be, very tumultuous, and it is expected that the right-wing parties will gain significantly. And naturally, what I said about Slovakia and Georgia, will be a factor in this situation. Now, in July, you have two major summits. One is the NATO summit, and there NATO will have a very hard time to find something, because if they have, after Afghanistan having been lost, now also Ukraine is lost, they will have a very hard time to keep up their narrative of self-identity and so forth. So the danger of an escalation even before that, I think, is high. Then also in July, you have the summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now then you have naturally the escalation of the financial warfare, because Janet Yellen just made pressure on the EU. I don't know if they needed that, but in any case, she did. And now also the EU is confiscating the interest rate gains from the stolen Russian assets, which are mostly in European banks. Now, Putin already announced that Russia will counter that they will confiscate American and probably European assets, and that will have an incredibly destabilizing effect on the international financial system. And there were even people like the IMF who had warned that this is completely foolish to do that, because it will bring the whole system into deep trouble. Then naturally that will play out in the fall, where then in October you have the next BRICS summit in Russia, where one has to expect that several other countries from the global south will join the BRICS. And that will just, establish the fact that there is a new emerging system coming into being before the US election. And, I have my big worries what will, be the next president of the United States, given the fact that, they have come out against China. Both major candidates, also minor candidates, have come out all against China. So that doesn't forebode a willingness to enter a dialogue, which would be very easy. Now, that means in this period, the next 6 months, we as a IPC, together with other like-minded forces, have to make every possible effort to put a different paradigm on the agenda, one which overcomes geopolitics, a new security and development architecture, which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia. We have to absolutely escalate our campaign for the Oasis Plan in Southwest Asia as a major stepping stone for such a new architecture globally. And that is what we should really define as the task we have to accomplish in the next period if world peace is to be saved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helga, for that opening and the overview for everyone here. I think this will be a very important stepping off point for us to discuss the ongoing topics. I'll make sure to include in the chat the Oasis Plan. We had a conference and just the whole concept of the Oasis Plan, especially if you're new, you probably aren't aware exactly what it is. I'll also post the other thing that Helga referenced, which is the new security and development architecture and her 10 principles behind how we could do that. So I'll make sure those two things are posted in there. But next, I would like to introduce former CIA analyst Larry Johnson, who is going to get on and give us an analysis as well. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hi there. Well, I don't feel I should go first. I think when we got the likes of Graham Fuller on here, he ought to be leading the parade. He's been involved with this a lot longer than me. I'll just make this very brief. We're at a transition point in world history. We're at one of those inflection points that people in the future, hoping that there is a future to look for us, will look back at this moment and recognize that this was a watershed. This will be akin to what happened at the end of World War II. This is the beginning of the transformation of the international world order that up to now the United States has controlled and dominated. There was a period during this where, the United States actually believed in diplomacy. And that was illustrated even with Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger figuring out how to open with China and recognize the one China policy and work with China not as an enemy, while an adversary, but nonetheless something we could deal with. And similarly, they could talk to the Soviets then, everybody from Nikita Khrushchev to Leonid Brezhnev, and even Yuri Andropov. But now we've entered a phase where the United States is like a 3-year-old child with a hammer. Everything looks like a nail and has to be hit. So our approach is, if you don't do what we want, we're either going to try to effect a regime change, or we're going to impose sanctions, or we're going to attack you. Those are like the three options. There's no other one to consider. And as a result of the U.S. actions, both against Russia and against China, it's created this momentum that's leading really to the breakdown of that world order that the United States, so many U.S. politicians like to talk about. And I think the trajectory of this is irreversible. The United States will implode upon itself because right now it is pretending that it can project military force in 3 different theaters, in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and in Asia against China. And the reality is the United States military is probably at its weakest and most vulnerable level ever in its history. And I say that because one of its major forces, for one of its major venues for projecting force, but the Navy, is now completely vulnerable to the hypersonic missiles which China and Russia both have. And reportedly Iran also, which means those ships can't get anywhere close to any of these potential conflict zones without being sunk. We're also seeing the limits of the power of the U.S. Navy with respect to Yemen and the Houthis. We're going on 6 months, and the most powerful Navy in the world, as we're told, can't stop a bunch of Houthis from firing missiles and shutting down the Red Sea. Why would anybody believe that the United States would be in a position to keep the Straits of Hormuz open in the event of an outbreak of war with Iran. This is a preview of coming attractions, what we're seeing in the Red Sea. The United States is spending liberally on an F-35 aircraft, $100 million apiece. The only problem is only 29% of them can be operationally capable right now. So it's the United States has spent lots of money, adopted a very strident military perspective, and has really equipped itself to be expeditionary military force, but no longer has the economic or industrial capacity to sustain that. So the emergence of Russia and China in this partnership, I don't think is a temporary or passing phenomena. I think it is historic. This will be looked back on in the future as the moment in which, let's call it, the rise of the global South. People throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America are frankly sick and tired of being bullied by the United States. And up to this point, they have not had an alternative. Now they do. And I think that's one of the reasons we see the countries in the Sahel, Niger and Chad, that they're telling the French, hey, beat it, get out. United States, so long, see you later. The United States can no longer offer beads and blankets to try to take territory. We're entering a new age. And here's the problem. I can't identify a single political leader in the United States, anybody that has any kind of public popularity, that is capable of speaking out and acknowledging this reality. Instead, we've got the same old tired rhetoric of threats and in condemnation. People like myself who dare to speak up and try to explain what's going on are called puppets of Putin. That I'm on the payroll of the Russians. And the only thing I have to say to that is, if I'm on the payroll, where's my check? Show me the money. So I'll stop there. I think we're entering both a very dangerous time, but out of this time of great peril comes great opportunity.
Thank you very much, Larry Johnson, and thank you for joining us today. And if you're able to please stay on, because we will have a general discussion coming up with people who are attending right now live. We have about 200 people on and more joining. So I definitely look forward to people asking questions to our various lineup of experts here today. We do have a little bit of some technical problems, so I am going to go to you, Graham Fuller. Let me just introduce you. Graham Fuller, who's a former U.S. diplomat, CIA official, and Islamic scholar, and we are very happy to have you on today, especially given your just immeasurable amount of interventions that you've made in the world, which I personally appreciate. So thank you so much, Graham, for joining us.
Thank you, Anastasia, and I want to also thank Larry Johnson for his very pointed remarks that I think are right on the mark. Larry and I have both toiled in the vineyards of intelligence in the past. I'd like to think that perhaps gives us some perspective, maybe a more realist perspective of what's going on in the world, but I completely join him in his perspective on what at this extraordinary moment in history that we're passing through, and the very dangerous decline in so many aspects of U.S. power, including domestically, with a country that seemingly torn apart by a rich, poor gap, failing medical system, failing infrastructure, divided governance. It's very problematic. Well, the major issue that I'd like to raise today is just to look at the nature of the complicated, perhaps triangular relationship in the Middle East that revolves particularly around Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. I think we all know that during the Cold War years, there were good reasons to be concerned about Soviet intentions. There was Soviet domination of its neighbors for a long period of time. So this Cold War mentality became quite deeply set in the United States, but it has somehow grown. The intensity of this black and white approach to the world seems to have deepened and is now hindering, I think, what the United States would hope or should hope to accomplish. Basically, I would have to say I view the United States at this point as a country which is unable to face the reality of its decline, relative decline in the world. Of course, the United States is an intensely creative country. It's militarily still powerful. Its technology is extraordinary. Its artistic contributions are remarkable, but it is a country in decline, and I fear that this is a period of denial that will not help us. Well, going back to what the essential early days in the Middle East, the United States tried to maintain its hegemony primarily by warning and supporting, claiming to support Saudi Arabia and many of the Gulf states against the Soviet enemy. So the United States was dedicated to protecting the free flow of oil, so-called. As we look back on it, there was actually never any threat to the free flow of oil. It almost never happened anywhere at any time, except for a brief, ironically, Saudi embargo at one point. But otherwise, there was no threat. So that was one of the major U.S. points of attempting to establish hegemony, and through defensive alliances with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was no more enemy in that regard. So the new enemy for the United States became Iran. Now, I have a lot of problems with Iran. I think many of us do. It's hardly an ideal regime, but the idea that this presented some massive threat to the Middle East, I think, was grossly overblown. But that became then the United States' main hook to provide or offer to provide defensive security for the region. Now, the techniques for maintenance of U.S. hegemony in the region have been several. Obviously, the United States has worked very closely with Israel in this regard under considerable AIPAC pressure, which dominates American thinking on foreign policy in the Middle East. The United States played heavily, as I said, on the so-called challenge between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But ironically, and probably quite intentionally, China remarkably put an end to that with its unexpected, I certainly was taken aback by it, China's sudden ability to moderate, bring about a peace between, or at least an accommodation between Saudi Arabia and Iran that had not existed for decades and decades. So that essentially took the wind out of the sails of the argument that the Iranians are coming throughout the Persian Gulf, and I think now opening the door to closer ties and more peaceful accommodation in the region. The Abraham Accords was again a plan to try to bring certain countries into close ties with Israel without examining or solving the bleeding Palestinian problem. I fear now, from the American perspective, that even the Abraham Accords are seriously a threat with Israel's extraordinarily brutal actions in Gaza. I would just like to point out, it's very fashionable, I think, among certain would-be analysts to say that the problem with Saudi Arabia and Iran is simply this eternal, if you will, quote unquote, struggle between Shiites and Sunnis over religion. This is basically nonsense. There's no fundamental difference between Sunni Islam and Shiite Islam, except in some of the most minor details. We're talking here essentially about national cultures that are in conflict with each other, but it's not about religion. If you say it's about a religion, it's insoluble. If it has to do with clash of national interests and communities, that is soluble through diplomacy, which the United States seems to have abandoned. I'm afraid today, when I look around the world, when I look at the Middle East, I don't see any Arab state taking a serious lead in being able to either speak for the Palestinians or to speak more broadly to an Arab-Israeli settlement. It's such an irony, as Larry Johnson just pointed out, that this tiny, dirt poor country of Yemen is the most outspoken and attempting to do something to stand up for the Palestinian cause that no other Arab leader virtually is willing to do so. So we're really left, I felt this way for a long time, there are only two serious states, in my view, in the Middle East left today. And one is Turkey and the other is Saudi Arabia. I'm sorry, one is Turkey and the other is Iran. And it's interesting that both of these states are not Arab, and maybe that's the reason that they seem able to speak up. But this is quite an extraordinary fact that the diplomatic drive and impetus is coming from those two states primarily. Larry talked, I think, quite accurately about the decline of the U.S. in the face of the growing role of BRICS. We see every single day now the rise of China in one area, either technology or military or diplomatic or educational or scientific breakthroughs that are really dangerously leaving the United States behind. So I think we're in an era where it's almost impossible to predict where all of these events are going. I would not want to, at this point, even though I've been in the business of helping draw up long-term forecasts and for the region, I would not want to make very many forecasts right now as to how the Middle East is going to come out of all of this. What the position of Israel will be is very, very uncertain. Things could possibly go back to the way they were, but it's very dubious. And the role, I think, of Israel perhaps has been seriously, if not permanently, damaged. So my last urging on this simply is, I think the United States is still in the position of a country desperately trying to maintain its global hegemony that maybe made some sense during the Cold War, but since then has not. And we seem to be dedicated primarily to doing everything we can to weaken and diminish the role of China and Russia in the world. We essentially openly identify them as enemies or adversaries, if you will, whatever the language is. It's interesting that neither China nor Russia do employ those terms vis-a-vis the United States. I think if the United States could go back to its most magnificent moments, like at the end of World War II, when it got involved in the rebuilding of Europe and the creation of a European Union to which it contributed. These were all highly positive, constructive elements. But today, Washington seems to have retreated sullenly almost to trying to protect what limited fading hegemony that it has. And if that is the course that America continues to pursue, I fear our role as a major constructive force in the world will diminish rapidly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graham Fuller, for that overview. I just want to reach out to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, if perhaps she would have a response. Otherwise, we can continue. Oh, you appear to be muted, Helga. Oh. Try now. It's not working. Okay, try now, Helga. No. I'm sorry, Dave, do you know what the issue is?
Okay, now
There we go.
unmuted. Okay, no, I just want to say very briefly that naturally what both Larry Johnson and Graham Fuller were saying is absolutely the case. But, you know, I mean, I would say that the difference in approach we want to have in the IPC and with the Schiller Institute, we are not forecasting, you know, we are forecasting, but we are not leaving it at that, but we are trying to think what would be the solution to bring the world out of this dynamic, because that dynamic, in my view, has an incredible danger of leading to World War III. I mean, the fact that Russia is now responding to what they call the Western provocations with the exercise of tactical nuclear weapons. And I watched a little video they produced where you can see how these tactical weapons are being put in position. And, you know, you could get really scared. And obviously that's the intention, because, you know, the Western establishments, they do all of these things as if there would be no tomorrow and no consequences. So obviously Russia is employing certain methods to make it more sensuous that is the reality. But I think that if you look at the totality, if this idea that Russia and China are enemies, if that cannot be overcome, I'm afraid that, you know, the chances that we will end up in World War III are approaching 100%. And that is why, you know, we have to mobilize to, because the way out would be so absolutely breathtakingly easy. You know, I believe that the BRICS Plus will soon, probably this year, clearly represent the vast majority of the human species. India and China together already have almost 3 billion people. Then you have other large countries like Indonesia, Brazil, Nigeria, South Africa, who all are part of this. So, you know, and since none of these countries has stated that they regard the West as enemy, to the contrary, you know, if from the United States and European nations, I'm saying deliberately not EU, because the EU, I think, is a construct which will not respond positively to this. If they would just say, we want to cooperate with you, there are so many problems we have to address. You mentioned the gap between rich and poor. The aspiration of the developing countries is to overcome poverty, underdevelopment, and really do away with the remnants of neocolonialism, which persisted in lack of access to credit and so forth. And now with the new development bank of the BRICS, you know, and other new financial institutions, they see for the first time the chance to really have improvement of their living standard and end poverty. So if the West would have any sense, we would just say, that's excellent. Finally, we can solve the refugee problem in a humane way by helping these countries to build up their own economies. That way they don't have to run across the Sahara and the Mediterranean just to die there in a mass grave. We should be happy about that. And I think, our organizing is really aimed to do that. As a matter of fact, we will have an internet conference mid of June, which the invitation I have only in German so far, but we will post it. And you should all register and help building that, because we need a counter voice of reason. And hopefully we can change the mind of enough people to go in the direction I'm saying.
Thank you, Helga. Okay, well, I very much appreciate the responses, and we already have questions coming in. I want folks just to hold off for a little bit longer. We have 2 more people who will be speaking. And actually, one of the responses people are asking, who is in the United States that we can actually trust? What can we do? And not to puff you up, Jose Vega, but I very much appreciate the interventions that you and what you've inspired with many, many other people, especially young people. Jose Vega is an interventionist that has gone viral on social media, and also a candidate in New York City, Bronx, against Richie Torres. So I'd like to ask Jose Vega to hop on.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, yesterday we celebrated some pretty big news because we handed in our petitions yesterday. We had a requirement of 3,500 petitions to hand in, for 3,500 signatures to hand in. So for the people who are not familiar with American politics, in order to actually put your name on the ballot to be a candidate, you actually need a minimum number of signatures. In our case, for my congressional district, we needed 3,500 valid signatures, with the possibility that our signatures could be challenged, meaning they could be thrown out if some signatures were found to be not valid or people were not registered to vote. So not only did we get that requirement, we got triple that requirement. And we handed in yesterday. And this, I posted a video of this on my social media yesterday, and it does, it's been going around. It's got about 1,000 likes or so and about over 20,000 views. And people are just extremely happy that I was able to meet the requirement. And, looks like we will be on the ballot when it comes to me versus Richie Torres this November. And so, and now we have kind of a culmination of like, okay, we got the bureaucratic process out of the way. Now it's a question of mobilization. And I know there's somebody on here who will probably be speaking during the Q&A who flew in for my campaign from North Carolina. I know she was asked to speak. And so she'll probably be speaking during the Q&A. And she can talk more a little bit about what inspired her to actually come in and fly into my campaign. I visited the campuses. Some people may know I reported this in some of the earlier calls, where I was at CCNY. I was around Columbia and around some of the students organizing these campus protests, campus movements in these campuses. And I was seeing firsthand exactly what they were doing, what they were trying to do. I did not see any examples of anti-Semitism, but they were also happy that I'm having an independent campaign, that we are not constrained by a party system, that I am unaffiliated with any major party, and that I am completely independent. People may remember that when the Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went to Columbia, they kicked her out. Well, they didn't kick her out, but they denounced her visit, saying they didn't want any opportunists coming to visit. However, when I showed up as an independent candidate, we were treated a little differently, especially given the fact that my opponent is Richie Torres, who initiated this law called the Columbia Act, as a way to go after the Columbia students and monitor for anti-Semitism in the campuses. And so people are not happy with Richie Torres, neither are the college students. And there's a lot of people who are looking to say, okay, how do we get this guy out and put somebody in who's actually worthwhile being in the congressional seat? And, this is very much like George Galloway example, of, hey, listen, we're fed up with establishment politics, but let's not just put somebody in who's, not just the establishment, but somebody who's qualified, like George Galloway. And what we're finding here in the Bronx, especially when I'm going around organizing, talking to people about my campaign, talking to them about the Oasis plan, and this idea that actually there can be cooperation and we can develop a sovereign Palestine. We can make it look like the next Beijing or Shanghai, within the next 5 to 10 years with international cooperation. People are starting to recognize me around the neighborhood, are starting to give us, free food. They're giving us their support. We're having people calling in saying their neighbors are talking about me and that's why they want to support me, and they're calling in. So we're definitely generating a buzz here in the district, in the Bronx, and it's truly great what's going on. And all of this is rooted in the intervention principle that Anastasia talked about. A process that started 2 years ago, where a group of us were getting up and going after these politicians, going after the people who tell lies, and just confronting them with the truth. This candidacy, especially the fact that it's an independent candidacy, mine and Diane Sayers, it really goes to speak volumes that this can only work because we are independent, and we are reasonable independents who are bringing in truth into the race. And people will remember this started around Ukraine. I was confronting Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez because she was sending all this money to Ukraine, not mobilizing against the war mobilization. And that those words resonated around the world. There's a reason why we have an international recognition and why those interventions were translated into 9 different languages. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone who's on this call listening. And I think I'll end it there, Anastasia.
Thank you, Jose. No, it is very much inspiring to hear all of the work that's happening there, and to see so many young people getting active in this process. I think it's important to emphasize, that this intervention process is actually inspiring people, not because they're saying, hey, I like you, but it's saying, whoa, that's something I can do to change history as well. And that's what we're seeing with so many other folks who are getting up and speaking truth to power to these political scumbags, really. And I could say worse, but I won't on this public meeting. But I just want to remind folks, I'm going to post in the chat the sign up form for people to sign up for the email updates. You can also leave your phone number as well. That's not mandatory, but if you'd like to receive the email updates of the International Peace Coalition, to be informed about all these meetings, the different committees that we have, classes, all different kinds of things that we're doing, please make sure to leave that before you get off at any point during this discussion today. Next, I'd like to go to Ray McGovern, who is a beloved participant of the International Peace Coalition. He's also a member of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity and a former CIA analyst who is joining us as well. Do I have you on here, Ray?
Thank you for having me on. I listened to most of what preceded here. We had some problems here at home. So let me just say that it's a delight to hear sensible people talking about very important, sensible things, especially my former colleagues, Larry Johnson, Graham Fuller, not to even mention Helga. So what could I add to this? Well, I started working as an analyst for CIA in January of 1964. So that's 60 years ago. My first account was Sino-Soviet relations, watching what the Russians were doing to the Chinese and vice versa. And they were squeezing each other, to borrow a word from Joe Biden. Now they're in a fraternal embrace that won't stop. This just by way of saying that I've seen a lot of stuff, okay? And I pretend to a good bit of expertise, particularly on Russian and Soviet foreign policy. But every now and then I'm surprised, and I'm embarrassed at being so surprised. That was the case in February of 2022 when Putin sent his forces into the Donbass. I didn't think he'd do it. It seemed to me that the U.S. had offered him at least half a loaf. I even wrote that. What was the half a loaf? Most people don't realize that Joe Biden promised Putin on the 30th of December that the U.S. would not put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Putin had said that this was inevitable. Putin called Biden before negotiations started, bilateral negotiations started in Geneva in 9 and 10 January 2022. And he got this into Biden made this undertaking. We have no intention. That's the readout. We have no intention of putting offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Now, I thought that was enough to deal. Okay, what I didn't know is that when Blinken met with Lavrov, Blinken said, "I don't know anything about that. Forget about it. We have the right to put ballistic missiles anywhere we want. Offensive ballistic missiles, yeah. Well, let's talk about maybe limiting the number that we'll put into Ukraine." I didn't learn that until 3 weeks ago when Lavrov said that publicly. Okay, what am I saying here? I'm saying that I was surprised. That was one reason I was surprised. The other reason I was surprised is that China had told Putin, "Look, you go ahead and do what you need to do. Yeah, we were devoted to the Treaty of Westphalia, where you don't interfere in the forms of other countries, but you do what you have to do." He told that to Putin on the 4th of February, 3 weeks before Putin invaded Ukraine. Now, 3 weeks, right? What happened during those 3 weeks? Well, that was the Beijing Olympics. Okay, they were over on the 20th of February. Putin had the wisdom to wait a decent interval, but 4 days later was the invasion. I'm saying this. I'm saying that surprised me. What else surprised me? More recently, I was really surprised that the Russians made it clear that they would be running exercises of non-strategic nuclear weapons. Whoa, tactical nuclear weapons. This was mentioned earlier, including by Helga. My God, I never would have expected that. So what's the lesson I draw from this? One lesson is that the Russians are dead serious about Ukraine. They're not going to give up. And what they're trying to do is tell the United States, these people with tin ears, look, we are so dead serious that we're willing to do an unprecedented step, and it is unprecedented as far as I can remember, of announcing that we're rehearsing or exercising our tactical nuclear weapons. Third surprise, the Chinese have blessed this. Now, how do the Chinese bless such things? They don't say anything about it. They meet with Putin, and this squeeze that Biden talked about, the Chinese squeezing the Russians back at Biden and Putin's one-on-one personal summit on the 16th of June, 2021. That squeeze that Biden was told was what the Chinese was squeezing the Russians. Well, it was very clear. Even some of you will remember that Xi, as he sent off Putin at the airport, spontaneous or not, he took the initiative, big panda bear hug of the smaller Putin, smothering him with a two-cheek embrace. Okay, so what am I saying here? I'm saying, McGovern, you got so much wrong here. What are the Russians likely to do now that they've threatened to use tactical nuclear weapons? Well, I don't know, and it bothers the hell out of me. Unprecedented stuff, is really hard for analysts to deal with. I'm still trying to figure it out. But what I do know is that with these very provocative pronouncemements by everyone, including Mike Johnson, for God's sake, and the notion that the head of Estonia is going to talk about chopping up Russia because that would be a really good idea for peace. Okay. Well, this stuff is not quitting. Okay. Now, all important here is the campaign season. Now, we have not only Jose Vega running. Okay. That's really important. Okay. But we have Joe Biden running for re-election. I had thought that Putin would hold off on making a definitive defeat in Ukraine for the West until maybe after the election. He'd just keep attriting, and do what he does so well, wear down the Ukrainian forces. I am no longer sure about that. I think the provocations are so fast and so furious in coming that I don't know what Putin's going to do. I think he will stop well short of using nuclear weapons, but I think he will make good on his pledge to attack not only the airfields from which these F-16s might fly, but the airfields in Romania or Poland that are used when the ones in Ukraine are no longer usable. What will that do? Well, the press in our country is already saying, "Oh, New York Times, that's an attack on NATO. These are NATO folks. That's an attack on NATO." And so all I'm saying here is that we need to do everything we can. Jose is doing what he miraculously can do. All of us need to warn whoever is who doesn't have a tin ear that this is for real now. We have a nuclear threat from Russia that maybe other people expected. I didn't. And that just shows how seriously to take this. And just to go wind up back to where we started here, there is no trust. Now, the last piece that George Shultz, one of my favorites, secretaries of state, who I used to brief every other morning, last thing he said was, look, trust is the coin of the realm. Without trust, you can't deal with other countries, okay? There is no trust. As a matter of fact, there is no contact, as far as I can see, between significant U.S. officials and Russian officials. So we are at a liminal moment. We're at a tectonic shift in what the Russians used to call, the Soviets, the world correlation of forces. And the geniuses running our foreign policy don't get it. That's very potential. That's very flammable. And so we need to make sure that that we get our message out, at least if you agree with the very, very delicate situation we face now, to make sure that we do all we can, and we veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, including, of course, Larry and Graham, are trying to do that, but we can't get through any better than most other people. So I'll leave it there. I just wonder what the next surprise will be for McGovern. And not that I pretend to know everything or be able to anticipate anything, but here are three examples I had used where I was surprised. None of them were pleasant surprises. I'm just fearful of what the next one might be. Thanks for listening.